Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we have returning special guest FJ Ray, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be replacing the fan clutch on his 80 series Land Cruiser. It's a 97 with the 1FZ-FE engine. The fan clutch that we're going to install is not an OEM one, it's a modified one sold by the Redline Land Cruiser company. What this modified fan clutch will do for you is it will keep your engine cooler because of how they modified it. And to be able to describe this thing accurately, I'm going to read right from their website so you get the correct information. To help keep your 1FZ-FE engine stay cooler and run at the optimal temperature, our modified OEM ASIN fan clutch engages at 95 degrees as we change the CST fluid formula and adjust the temperature spring to achieve a long-term solution with a higher lockup rate. This is also known as the blue hub fan clutch mod. So they actually have this thing colored blue. Redline makes modified fan clutches for a lot of different Land Cruisers. This one with the blue hub is known for the 1FZ engine only. Finally, it says, this modification is very popular because it correctly matches the fan engagement to the water pump rotation dynamics. Now, a lot of you already know this, but when your engine is turning and say the engine is cold, it's not up to operating temperature yet, your fan is not turning revolution for revolution with the engine revolutions. So if your engine is turning at 2,000 RPMs, and your fan clutch isn't locked up yet, this is not turning at 2,000 RPMs. When the temperature finally gets to that magic temperature, then the fan clutch locks up, and then now it is turning one for the revolutions of the engine. I'm going to come in closer to the camera and show you something that you might not know about how these things work. So this spring right here, this is a temperature sensitive spring. And as it gets hot and to the temperature that it's designed to open at, it's going to elongate and twist. And the elongation of the spring is going to open up fluid channels inside the fan clutch and allow that special fluid to flow in to make the fan clutch lock up. I wish I could explain it a little bit better than that, but that's just a very, very basic explanation of how these things work. It's a temperature sensitive spring that elongates at the proper temperature, opens up fluid channels, and then makes the fan clutch lock up. If you want to learn more about how these things work, I'm sure there's plenty of videos on YouTube that will explain the mechanical dynamics of how a fan clutch goes from unlocked to locked. So this fan clutch from Redline comes with a couple belts because maybe your belts haven't been changed in a while and this is the opportune time to replace them. And then it comes with all the necessary hardware, the nuts that attach the fan clutch to the fan pulley bracket, and it comes with the smaller nuts that attach the plastic fan to the fan clutch itself. So with all that said, we're going to get out to the rig and we're going to get started with replacing this fan clutch. Coming in from the front of the vehicle, you have your radiator here, you have the fan shroud, and then you've got your fan, and then attached to the fan you have your fan clutch, and then you have the nuts that attach the fan clutch to the fan pulley. You can see right here the parallel fan alternator belts. You might be tempted to try to remove the fan clutch without taking tension off these belts, but I've tried that before on other vehicles, and once you start loosening these nuts, this pulley is going to want to try to pull off the studs of the fan pulley bracket. So we aren't going to try that. We're just going to take some tension off the belts by making an adjustment at the alternator. At the very top of the alternator, you have the pivot bolt, and you have to break that free so when you back off the belt adjusting bolt, the alternator will be able to pivot and then the two belts will become looser. Going to the very bottom, you have the lock bolt for the adjuster. So you have to break that free to where it's a little bit loose, and then that enables you to turn the adjuster bolt on the other side. So you can see the back side of the bolt right here, the threads, and then that bolt is going towards the driver's side that you have to reach in there with a wrench to turn it. Here's a better shot of that lock bolt for the adjuster. I'm pointing at it right there. In the previous shot, the belts were obscuring it. So I have to first break that free to where then I can get onto the adjuster bolt on the other side over here, and I could start turning that and loosening the tension on the belts. To start off with, I'm going to break free the pivot bolt. I have my 3/8 gear wrench ratchet, I have a short extension, and I have a 14mm socket. So the reason why I showed you where all those fasteners were on the alternator at the beginning is because when we are actively turning the wrenches, it's going to be really hard to be able to get the wrench and the camera in there. So now you know where everything is. Hopefully it's going to make sense what we're actually doing when we're doing it. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I'm going to break the pivot bolt free. You don't have to go crazy loose, just to where it's nice and loose, and then that's good enough. You don't want to back it out all the way. You just want to loosen it. Next, I'm going to get a box end wrench, and I'm going to go for the lock nut for the adjuster. You see this hose right here connected to the top of the radiator? This hose is attached to a plastic nipple, and while you're working on your 1FZ engine, if you rest your body weight on that, you could snap off that plastic nipple, and then you're going to be really upset at yourself because now you're going to need a replacement radiator, which they're not exactly cheap. So do yourself a favor and just be mindful of this nipple right here and don't lean against it and snap it off. At first I thought getting to that lock nut for the adjuster, it was going to be better with either an open end 12mm or a box end 12mm. Ends up that's not the right choice because the belt is in your way to get a box end wrench on there, which would be a better connection than the open end. So then I took a better look at it, and it does look like you can get onto it with a socket. When you're looking in from the top, it looks like the belt would get in the way of getting a socket on there, but you actually can get in there. So again, I'm using a short extension with my 3/8 ratchet with a 12mm socket, and I'm gonna break loose that lock nut for the adjuster. The lock nut for the adjuster is just like the pivot bolt. You just have to get it loose, but you don't want to pull it out all the way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in there, most likely with a ratcheting box end wrench, but maybe I can get in there with a small ratchet, like maybe a 1/4 inch ratchet. So I'm going to figure that out and then we'll come back. I decided to use a flex head ratcheting 12mm box end wrench. You can see I'm coming in underneath the power steering reservoir and turning the wrench, and then I have one of my left fingers on the head of the wrench so it doesn't slip off the adjusting bolt. It's kind of tight in here. It would have been better to get the battery box out of the way to have more room, but I didn't want to deal with the battery box because he has a lot of accessory wiring running through, and I didn't want to take the extra time, so I'm struggling a little bit with access, but I'm able to turn it in this fashion. And I'll show you the wrench I'm using once I get the belt untensioned. Here's the flex head ratcheting wrench I used for the job. It's made by Gear Wrench. And the flex head capability is what makes these wrenches so functional. With the flex head ability, you can come in at different angles to get onto the fastener. And this was the kind of position I was wrenching in. I had to have the wrench at an angle to where I can turn it to loosen the adjuster bolt to detension the belts. So a set of these is worth its weight in gold. They're super, super helpful. So I backed off the adjuster quite a bit. There's quite a bit of play in the belts. And so I think that's enough to where when I loosen the fan clutch nuts, it's not going to be applying any torque to the fan pulley to try to pull it off the studs. The two tools I'm going to use to loosen the fan clutch nuts is a small pry bar and a long 12mm box end wrench. The pry bar is going to be used to wedge in between two adjoining nuts on the fan clutch, and then I'm going to get onto a third nut and break it free, and then I'm going to turn the whole fan clutch to the next bolt, again wedge the pry bar between two of the adjoining nuts and break another one free, and I'm going to keep on doing that till I get all 4 nuts loose. So I'm going to come in with my pry bar, and I'm gonna get it right in between two of the nuts. And then I'm gonna have to be applying opposing force, because when I try to loosen this nut at the 12 o'clock position, the fan clutch is gonna wanna turn counterclockwise. So I have to apply some force in the clockwise position to hold it. Okay, that one's loose. And then I'm gonna turn the whole assembly to the next one, get it at about the 12 o'clock position, and do the same thing. Okay, that one's loose, and you get the idea. We're gonna do the same with the last two. One thing I wanna note is that once you break one of them free, you don't wanna take that nut off all the way, because the nut is protecting the threads of the stud. So you wanna keep all the nuts in place until you get all of them loose. Okay, they're all loose, and now I can just take them off with my hands. When it comes to taking the nuts off, I would rotate the fan clutch until you get one of the nuts at the 12 o'clock position. Take that one off and then rotate the next one to the 12 o'clock position and get that one off. If you try to reach underneath and get all the nuts off with the fan clutch in the same position, you'll be more likely to drop one of them down onto your skid plates, and now you're going to be forced to go fishing for it. So just take your time and rotate the fan clutch and get each nut at the 12 o'clock position and take it off at that point. This shouldn't have happened, but it could happen. The whole stud came out. Usually what just comes off is the nut. So I can get this off by using my bench vise, but just know that this can happen. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reinstall this with a little bit of blue Loctite so that doesn't happen. So this is what's supposed to happen. The nut's just supposed to come off, and the stud is supposed to stay in place inside the fan pulley bracket. I apologize to any of you Land Cruiser people that know these 1FC engines really well. I was calling it the fan pulley bracket like I know on my third generation 4Runners, but the fan clutch is obviously connecting to the water pump itself, so I misspoke. I apologize. So wherever you heard me say fan pulley bracket, insert water pump. So obviously I still have a lot to learn about these 1FC engines, but I'm willing to learn. Now I've got all four nuts off that attach the fan clutch to the water pump, and now I'm gonna slowly wiggle the fan clutch off the studs and then get that sucker out. So I'm just wiggling this thing back and forth. It can get kind of stuck onto the studs. You just gotta be careful. You don't wanna pull back with a lot of force and then slam your fan clutch into your radiator. There we go. Let's see if I could sneak this thing out. Will I have to pull the fan shroud out? Let's see. It looks like I have to pull the fan shroud out. I thought maybe I'd be able to get lucky and sneak this thing past, but I don't think so. I'm really trying to do this job with the least amount of steps as possible. With the fan shroud in the way, you'd probably be inclined to now disconnect the upper radiator hose so you can pull the fan shroud further out of the way to sneak out that fan clutch, but I just took the two top bolts out that hold the fan clutch to the radiator, and I learned that I can sneak the fan clutch out towards the passenger side, so we'll show you that now. So we have two fan shroud bolts right here on the top, and I'm going to zip those out with the 12mm socket and my Milwaukee ratchet. You'll see that the fan shroud is impeded by the upper radiator hose, but if you just tweak it enough on the passenger side, you could sneak it out. All right, so we finally have the assembly of the fan clutch and the fan blade out of the rig. And then now what we have to do is we have to separate the plastic fan blade assembly from the fan clutch. The fan blade assembly is connected to the fan clutch with four 10mm nuts. I'm going to zip them out with a deep 10mm socket and my Milwaukee ratchet. And this sucker should just come off just like that. I would say if this fan clutch wasn't actually bad, you were just doing this as an upgrade to the Redline fan clutch, I would save this and keep it in a parts bin that you take with you when you're going on your adventures, whether you're overlanding or doing some technical four-wheeling. This would be a nice thing to add to your extra parts bin. So if you do have a fan clutch that stops working, you would be able to throw your old one in. So keep it. All right, so we have the Redline fan clutch, and we're just gonna put the old fan onto it. You could clean it up a bit, but it's just gonna get dirty again anyways. But all right, so I cleaned it up a bit. There was a bunch of dirt on the inside of here. I just used the brush and used a little brake cleaner. Now it's looking a little bit better. I'm gonna slide this over the top, line up the holes, and then I'm gonna use the new hardware that came with the Redline kit. Ray came equipped with a Toyota factory service manual for his FZJ80 Land Cruiser, and we looked at it and we couldn't come up with torque values for these little 10mm nuts. So when that happens, and you know our channel, we use the spec of good and tight. Now you have to use some common sense. These are a very small fastener, so you're gonna want to use a wrench with very little mechanical advantage. So I have a little 1/4 inch ratchet, and I'm gonna tighten them up equally, crossing pattern, and then just use my best judgment. I'm not even gonna use all the leverage that this wrench would allow me. I'm gonna choke up a bit and just cinch them up snug. If you get too big of a wrench on there with way too much mechanical advantage, you could easily strip these out. So I know the torque spec is pretty low, but what it is exactly, I'm not sure. And those are all good and tight. So remember, one of the studs came out with the nut, and what I found is that the threads were a little bit sticky on the side of the stud where the nut goes on. So I cleaned up the threads with the thread restorer kit, and now they're not sticky anymore, and this won't happen again. But as extra insurance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of blue 242 Loctite on the threads, and then I'm just going to screw this in hand tight, and this will deter the stud coming out in the future if the threads get sticky again. What I could do to really make sure that stud is tight inside the water pump is I could use a double nut technique, but I'm not going to bother doing that because this water pump is brand new. Ray just got this engine rebuilt at Yoda One Performance in Riverbank, California, and so I know that the threads on that water pump are perfect, and so just by getting it in hand tight should be good enough with the Loctite. If you were planning on replacing the 2 parallel belts as part of this job, you would have to remove the AC belt first, because those 2 belts that run across the water pump pulley and run on the alternator pulley, they sit behind the AC belt. So you would have to go underneath the rig. You'd have to take off the skid plate to get access, and there's an idler pulley for the AC belt, and you would have to loosen that lock nut for that pulley. You would have to back off the adjuster, and then you could pull off the AC belt so you can get these 2 belts out. But I'm sorry, we're not going to be doing that for this job because, again, Ray just got a brand new rebuilt engine from Yoda One Performance, and I know those belts are brand new. So now we're going to sneak in the new fan clutch assembly the way we took the old one out. And you just got to line up the studs and slide that sucker on. The Redline kit did come with new fasteners, but these nuts that Ray had on his engine are new also, I could tell. They're perfectly clean because, again, this is a rebuilt motor. The careful way to getting these nuts off and back on is using your index finger and your thumb. So you just come in there with the nut between your index finger and thumb, and you can get it started. And then the same thing that we did when getting the nuts off, I'm going to get the next one up to the 12 o'clock position, and then again come in with my index finger and thumb and get the next one started. Rotate the assembly and get the next one started. And the last one. All right, they're all started. I'm going to reattach this fan shroud to the radiator so it's not in my way when I'm ready to cinch up those nuts. I'm going to cinch up these fan shroud bolts just by feel. I think the factory service manual did say these are 43 inch-pounds, but just use your best judgment. Choke up on a small wrench and just cinch them up snug. It's not holding a whole lot. It's just holding a very lightweight plastic shroud to the plastic radiator, so don't over tighten them. Okay, those are both tight. And now what I'm going to do is just with my fingers get these nuts touched down a little bit better, and then I'm going to tighten them up with the same technique I did before by utilizing a pry bar to hold the assembly firm while I tighten one of the nuts with the box end wrench. You can see what I'm doing is I'm hooking my thumb on the fan blade and pushing the fan clutch against the water pump pulley, and then just using my middle finger to spin the nut. That seems to be working pretty good. Okay, those are all touched down, and now I'm going to get my pry bar and the box end wrench and cinch them up. Another torque spec we looked for, just so we can give it to you, because I know some people live and die by the torque value. We looked in the factory service manual for the spec for those fan clutch nuts, and we couldn't find one. And even if you did have one, it's a little bit difficult to get a torque value on those because of how the fasteners attach the fan clutch to the fan pulley. It would be really hard to get a torque wrench in there to begin with. You might be able to do it with a crow's foot wrench, but I've never bothered trying to torque those. I just go by feel with a box end wrench and with the pry bar assisting me. So I would assume most people are going to do the same. They're just going to go by feel. Now in this case, the assembly is going to want to turn clockwise because you're tightening, so you have to do opposing force in the opposite direction. Okay, I'll rotate it and get the next one. And these box end wrenches have a ratcheting side too. That's what's nice about them. They have a solid side and a ratcheting side. Is that the last one? Let's see. Yep, that was the last one. I'm going to go ahead and do one more full pass, just rechecking each one of those nuts. And then a final thing we have to do is retension those tandem alternator water pump pulley belts, and then we'll be done with the job. So now what I'm doing is I'm turning the adjuster bolt to tension the belts. Same way I accessed it before. I'm reaching underneath the power steering reservoir, working the flex head ratcheting wrench, and then my left hand is pushing the wrench towards the bolt so it doesn't slip off. Normally what I like to do when tensioning belts is I like to get a belt tension gauge on there, but with the way this engine is, the upper part of the engine, the head overhangs the belts, and so you can't really get a belt tension gauge in there very well. I tried it and I couldn't get it on there. So I'm just going to have to go by feel. What I always tell people is a properly tensioned belt, doing it just by feel, is that you should be able to get a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of deflection. And what that means is when you grab the belt between two pulleys in the middle, you push and pull, and you should be able to move the belt that amount of movement, a 1/2 inch to 3/4. So I got a ways to go. This is still way too loose. We do have some torque specs for you in regards to the alternator. So the lock nut for the adjuster is torqued to 15 foot-pounds, and that's the one we're tightening right now. Okay, that's at 15 foot-pounds, and now we're going to get onto the pivot bolt with a 14 millimeter socket, and that one's torqued to 43 foot-pounds. There it is, 43 foot-pounds. So after you get the two belts tensioned properly and you torque the lock nut for the adjuster to the proper spec and you torque the pivot bolt to the proper spec, now the last thing you want to do is just double check the engine compartment, make sure you didn't leave any wrenches or rags or anything else you're using for the job inside the engine compartment that can get caught up in the engine, caught up with the fan or the belts, and then kind of ruin your whole day. So do a good double check. And we did that. Now we're going to start the engine and just see that everything is working properly. Everything looks good. All right, we're all done with this job. As you saw, it wasn't too difficult, but we did have a little bit of tight areas to work in, mainly getting the belts that go around the alternator and the water pump pulley. It was a little bit hard to get in there with the tools, but you saw it could be done. Ratcheting box end wrenches or flex head ratchets, those things are worth their weight in gold. So if you don't have those type of tools in your tool arsenal, I highly suggest getting them. The way I was able to get onto that adjuster bolt the way I did was because I had a flex head ratcheting 12 millimeter box end wrench. Without that, it would have been a real swear fest. So invest in those wrenches if you don't have them. I didn't exactly find in the factory service manual the steps to replacing a fan clutch, but I bet they would probably say to drain the radiator so you can remove the fan shroud completely out of the way. I bet they might even say remove the battery box, because that gets in the way of you being able to get in there and being able to turn that adjuster bolt that tensions and loosens the belts. But I didn't want to have to mess with any of that stuff. I wanted to do this job in the least amount of steps, and I think I accomplished that, I'm pretty sure. But if you have some tips and tricks that you know of, go ahead and share those in the comments of how I could have done this job a little bit easier or possibly with different tools. Time is going to tell if this modification is going to be really beneficial to Ray's engine. So Ray is going to have to be keeping track of his coolant temperature and noticing the differences, especially when he's really pushing the rig up grades and in high ambient temperatures. That's where we're probably going to see this modification shine. If you're just driving around town in a grocery getter, you're not really going to see the benefits of this mod. But if you go four-wheeling or you travel in the mountains in hotter ambient temperatures, this is where a modification like this is going to shine, because this Redline fan clutch is going to lock up sooner and it's going to keep your engine cooler for a longer period of time. What you have to know though is that this modification has a finite benefit. If you're climbing up a really steep long grade in hot temps, like maybe a long grade in Death Valley, and you're traveling in 105 degree temperature, at some point this modification is gonna tap out and it's not gonna be able to do anything more than the stock fan clutch could do for you. But what this mod is going to do is keep your engine cooler for longer because it locks up sooner. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about it, we're going to put a link to this Redline fan clutch in the video description, and you can go to their website and you can read up on it yourself. Or you can call them if you want to talk more with them about the benefits of this mod. A final thing that I want to mention to you is that relying on the analog temperature needle gauge is not the greatest idea, because when you see that needle start to rise, it's already too late. You've already overheated your engine. So what I suggest you do is come up with some type of aftermarket way to read your coolant temp. Whether you get a scan gauge or ultra gauge, or you wire in a aftermarket standalone gauge, whatever it is, you want to be able to see the actual temperature the engine is currently at, and not just rely on, oh, well, the needle is in the middle, I must be good. Well, you might not be good. You might be climbing up into the danger zone and not know it. So I can't recommend it enough. Monitor your engine coolant temp with some type of gauge. And a scan gauge is a very good way to go. Another thing you'd want to monitor while driving up grades, especially in hot ambient temps, is your automatic transmission fluid temperature. Now with these older 80 series Land Cruisers, I understand that the OBD2 port doesn't offer that information. So you could do something like I did on my 3rd generation 4Runner, my 1998. It is in that same age group as these 80 series Land Cruisers, and I couldn't read my transmission temp through the OBD2 reader either. So what I did is I installed an aftermarket one. If you click on the link above, you can see that video, and that is a very, very good thing to do to monitor your automatic transmission temperature too, because you don't want to be ignorant of what your temperature is at, because you could be climbing into the 200s and then you can maybe burn up your transmission if you go too long at those very hot temps. So you want to monitor your engine temperature and your automatic transmission temperature so you know when it's appropriate to pull over and give your engine and transmission a rest for a while, because if you just drive oblivious, you're going to end up burning up your engine, you're going to end up burning up your transmission, and then you're going to be coming out of pocket big money and big time to fix it. So do yourself a favor and monitor those 2 temps. I think I hit that home enough. So with all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guest FJ Ray. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing. Hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when we put up new content, click on that notification bell, and then you'll know every time we put up a new video on our channel. Peace out. Sick mods. Happy wrenching. Bye-bye.